What's up, AP Psych? Welcome to your first of two lectures that deal with personality. These we're going to learn four theories. The first two are psychodynamic theory and humanistic theory that try to explain why you are the way you are. I love this stuff. So the hard part is not going to be content in terms of getting through it. It's going to be that I know so much about this stuff that I love to go on and on. But I'm going to save a bunch of stuff for class. We're going to keep it pretty much to just what the slides say today. Here's our learning targets. Doesn't look that much, but it is. Trust me. Okay, psychodynamic theory. We first learned about this early in class because this represents the thumb on our crazy hand in the classroom. And we called it psychoanalysis. We are going to learn them as the same thing. Psychoanalysis is the historical name. Psychodynamic theory is the modern name. In either way, this school of thought was started by Sigmund Freud, very famous psychologist, well, doctor, really. And he had patients coming to him that seemed to have like nervous breakdowns or extreme mental health disorders. But he couldn't, at the time, we didn't have any knowledge of that stuff. And so he couldn't make medical sense over why is this person acting this way, seemingly so crazy. And he determined because there wasn't a medical biological reason with the body, that it had to be related to the unconscious. And he sort of put the unconscious or the study of the unconscious on the map, so to speak. And he defined the unconscious mind as a collection of mostly unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories. So these were things that you maybe felt guilty about or embarrassed about or fearful to talk about. And so you buried them deep down inside. He also kind of created this idea that a patient should lie on the couch while the therapist sits behind and the patient just talks and the therapist takes notes and then interprets later. More on that in a little bit. He also believed that the mind was, there were three parts of the mind and three parts of the personality. We're going to start by talking about the mind. He believed that the mind is like an iceberg, with the largest and most important part, the unconscious, hidden from awareness. So he believed that, yes, we have a conscious, a consciousness, that this is what you're currently aware of. I'm cold, I'm taking notes, I'm hungry, whatever the thing is. Then we have a preconscious, that our thoughts, these are thoughts that are retrievable as needed. So memories, facts, information, things like that, that we can tap into, access whenever needed. But then there's also this whole huge part of thoughts and memories and feelings and desires that are in our unconscious. We don't know that they're there, but they somehow seem to dictate our behavior, our moods, our actions, things like that. But we couldn't even put our finger onto why we are being that way. He also believed, as I said, that the personality had three major parts, and that the personality is the result of the interactions and conflicts amongst these three parts, components, particularly as to how they interact during childhood. So, psychodynamic theory will always look at what happened to you as a child, sometimes trauma, sometimes not, but always what happened to you as a child as the basis for who you are today. So, these three components. The first one is the id. This is your unconscious, that huge lower part of the iceberg. And that the unconscious is actually driving you to satisfy your basic sexual and aggressive drives. That is all about instant gratification, what you want to do, what you want to eat, what you want to say to someone, no matter what. And that we operate on pleasure principles, like meaning that's the most important thing. What you want right here, right now is the most important thing, making you who you are. But then we also have a conscious, a super ego. So not conscious, a conscience. This is your sense of right and wrong, your standards for judgment and future goals. And it operates on a moral principle of always trying to be perfect and right. And that these two forces, that kind of angel and devil voices in your head, think of that cartoon with the angel on one side and the devil on the other, kind of bickering about what to do. And so how did these two get along? Well, they didn't. So there was also an ego in your personality. This is not ego as in pride, but your just main sense of self. This is the executive that mediates the demands of the superego and the id, trying to balance them out. And it aims to operate on reality, be logical, be realistic, be rational, things like that. And if all three of these things can be in balance most of the time, then a person can have a strong mental health, can be healthy inside and out. So, how do we know about someone's unconscious? Well, it's not easy, especially since I can't click my slides. There we go. We're going to learn about three ways that people who follow, not believe in, follow the psychodynamic perspective try to use to get into those buried thoughts. The first one is free association. So again, think of that couch. Think of the therapist behind the couch taking notes on what someone says. That therapist would help a person to relax and say whatever came to mind, no matter how small, painful, and embarrassing. Let those feelings out, let those memories out. The more relaxed you are, maybe even slightly hypnotized, that level of deep relaxation. And when you just let those memories out and release them, you will feel better. And the psychologist can help you cope with them. So just letting those feelings fly. Okay, I have a little demo to go with this in this yellow box, but I don't want you to see it yet. So I'm going to pause and go to my next slide. Modern psychodynamic psychologists also developed two fairly well-known projective tests. So this wasn't Freud, but still in the same school of thought. And that these projective tests helped a psychologist reveal the unconscious mind of a patient. This only worked if these tests were administered by a psychologist and interpreted by a psychologist, and they were based on the defense mechanism of projection. We're going to talk about this in a couple slides, but projection basically means when you have feelings that you don't want to admit to, you actually put them on something or someone else. More on that later. So the first type of projection test is a thematic apperception test. This is when a psychologist would show someone a series of pictures of like ambiguous scenes, or put the word vague if you don't like the word ambiguous. Vague scenes that could be interpreted in all sorts of ways. People happy, people sad, people, well, I'm even saying happy and sad, just people doing all sorts of things and then waiting for the patient to describe or tell a story on what they see in this picture. Then the psychologist would interpret what the story was to try to get to, their mommy issues or their daddy issues. Then we also have the Rorschach ink blot test. This is when a psychologist, again, would show a picture of random ink blots or like paint stains almost, and ask someone again to describe what they saw. And then the psychologist would identify their inner feelings by analyzing and analyzing interpretations of those blots. You might be saying, why won't you show us pictures of these things? I will during class. That's why I'm going really fast. Just get these notes down because it will actually try this a little bit in class in a silly, untrained professional kind of way. So you know how skeptical I am about this theory, and that's because no matter what test you come out with, how can you actually prove that those tests really are reflecting a person's unconscious struggles? Here are some problems. Here are some official problems with these tests. Different psychologists may have different interpretations of the same patient and their story. So if a patient tells a story about a picture, an ink blot, or a vague scene, one psychologist might think it means that they're perfectly healthy and normal and everyone has those feelings. And then another psychologist might be like, uh-oh, this is actually showing signs of a mental health disorder. Well, not only are they interpreting them differently, which means that it's not a consistent test and it's not reliable, but it might lead to misdiagnosing a normal individual as pathological, meaning having a disorder. If that's the case, it means that these tests aren't testing what they're meant to. They're meant to test the unconscious, not necessarily disorders. So they might not be valid tests. And I know there's an extra apostrophe on the it's. Leave me alone. I'm trying to get through this lecture. Overall, studies show that tests are valid and reliable, interestingly, and that Rorschach ink blots have low reliability and validity. What your takeaway should be is that studies don't throw these out completely. They just have mixed results as to how useful these tests are. Again, more on that in class. Next is the other most famous, besides the id, ego, and superego, the other most famous Freud idea that continues today is defense mechanisms. We probably call them coping strategies today. And so we still look to these as things that exist in psychology and explaining human behavior today. But originally, our basis for them are a little different today. But originally, Freud said that these were coping strategies used by the ego to unconsciously protect itself against anxiety caused by id and superego conflicts. So that little devil and angel voice, when they were going at it and the ego didn't know what to do, these were the behaviors that came out. I'm going to go fast and we can revisit any of these. In fact, we will revisit these when we are together in class, but do your best to stay with me. First one, sublimation. Another thing to write down is substitution. This is when a person would spend energy on pro-social, good activities to avoid undesirable activities. So instead of punching your sibling because you're so angry and you know that's inappropriate, you go for a run. So substituting with something good. Going for a run, healthy, good, normal. Hitting your sibling, not so much. Next is denial, the refusal to perceive reality in order to protect ourselves from it. So knowing you have a test coming up, feeling really nervous about it deep down unconsciously, and knowing you won't have time to study anyways, but really tricking yourself to be like, it's fine. I understand this material. I'm a good guesser. I can always wing it. I'll be fine. Denial. Next is repression. Freud believed that this defense mechanism was actually underlying all other defense mechanisms. And we see evidence of repression in each one of these. But it's when you're forcing painful thoughts to the back of our mind. So not quite denial, but actually flat out ignoring or not even recognizing that a feeling exists at all. Regression is behaving or thinking like a child in order to avoid adult issues. So let's say two people are in an adult relationship and they're in a fight, that a person might actually just give them the silent treatment. No, I'm not talking to you. Not gonna be. Nope, not gonna. Well, that's childish behavior. You are regressing and acting like a child instead of dealing with your issues. Reaction formation is making unacceptable impulses into their opposite acceptable form. So perhaps you've got someone who you are supposed to trust and love and admire. Let's say a relative, and they mistreat you. And I'm talking like big time mistreat you. And you know that it's wrong or inappropriate for you to not love them and show them affection. So you overdo it, even though deep down inside you hate them and they're the worst and maybe even they're traumatizing to you, but you just tell everybody and you act towards them in a way that is super loving and supportive. So kind of going overkill with the opposite feeling than what you really feel. Then there's projection, the one I mentioned earlier. This is when you disguise threatening impulses by attributing them to others. So imagine you're thinking of, you're unconsciously over your relationship. You want to break up with the boyfriend or the girlfriend, and yet you're really uncomfortable with that idea. So you're not even really admitting it to yourself, but you're like, you know what? I think they don't like me anymore. I think they might want to break up with me. They hate me, don't they? No, that's really you. You're just putting those feelings onto them. Rationalization, trying to create logical explanations of our behavior to justify them. This is the most common defense mechanism. So just trying to make an excuse and explain away weird feelings or bad behavior. And then displacement. This is diverting our sexual or aggressive impulses to a more acceptable person or object. Let's say again, you just want to smack your sibling and they're making you so mad, but you're going to get into trouble and you shouldn't do it. So instead, you kick your dog. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't do that. Or maybe you take it out and you just like take it out on your best friend and just yell at them instead. And you don't really mean to be so aggressive towards them, but your parents aren't going to see that, so you won't get in trouble like you would if you started yelling at your sibling. Yeah, kicking your dog is a bad thing, but I mean, it kind of works in terms of an example. Okay, generally speaking, some of these might sound like really unhealthy, like you're not dealing with your feelings. Sometimes that's okay in small doses. These are only unhealthy when they cause self-defeating behavior, meaning they really do hurt you or your loved ones in the long run, and emotional problems when you do these too often and then eventually don't deal with what's really going on. I went really fast. If you miss any of my examples, we'll come up with more during class, but I want to make sure I get through everything. Criticisms of psychodynamic theory include the idea that development goes beyond childhood experiences, so psychodynamic theory focuses too much on your childhood issues. That there are only a few testable hypotheses, and the theory is mostly based on observations and interviews, and we really can't prove cause and effect. And that it explains behaviors in hindsight. If this is a personality theory, it should be able to explain how you are, not just how you came to be, but how you are and predict your behaviors and traits in the future. It doesn't really do that. Okay, this was the big giant theory. Now we've got the little one that it's paired with and is sometimes considered the opposite of psychodynamic theory. Humanistic theory is based on the idea that people control their own behavior and are innately good, that we're not all filled with unresolved childhood trauma, or even if we are, that there's ways to tap into that sense of goodness, and that we work with clients, not patients. We're not assuming there's things that are wrong with people. We might determine that there's things that people need, but that they're not problems to be dealt with. People are clients. That the goal should be for self-determination and self-actualization, that a person's maximizing their healthy personal growth and maximizing their potential. And this is a theory that is popular in counseling, education, and management psychology to this day. This theory was founded by Maslow and Rogers, and really in reaction to Freud. Like, hey, Freud is too negative. Freud and psychodynamic theory really just focuses on what's wrong. We want to focus on what makes people good or what's right. This is sometimes called the person-centered perspective, that we need to respect someone's sense of self, and that the self is most important, and that we as psychologists need to help a person make sure that their ideal self, their self-image, and their true self align. Because when these three things, who you want to be, who what you think of yourself, and how you really are in the world, when they all match up, one is in a state of congruence. And that state of congruence is what brings about the most positive, healthy sense of self-concept and self-esteem. You can almost think of this as just knowing who you really are, like deep down inside. Do you know yourself? And do you feel good about yourself? To get there, in the person-centered perspective, an individual would need an environment that provides acceptance, genuineness, and empathy. That there are no conditions of worth. There's no rules on you being accepted. That if you get good grades, we'll love you. Or if you own a big house, well, then we'll accept you. Or if you wear the cool clothes, that no, you just are accepted with how you are no matter what. And that you receive unconditional positive regard, which is sometimes just called unconditional regard. That your flaws, everything about you is just accepted and validated and all that warm and fuzzy stuff. That you are treated genuinely, that you're open with your feelings and that you can drop the facades, meaning you're not fake, you're very honest, you're upfront, and people treat you and you treat them back with authenticity. And then finally, empathy, that people are both willing to share and mirror our feelings and reflect the meanings of them. In other words, we feel understood. So we are accepted, we are authentic, and we are understood and validated. So not only that we receive these things, but we can give them to others. All of those things happen, and we are going to reach that state of congruence because our ideal self, true self, and self-image will all align. Criticisms of the humanistic theory. It sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it kind of is. Some of the concepts are super vague. They're subjective, that they too are open to interpretation. And what does it really mean to have a sense of true self and ideal self? And is it constant and things like that? It also lacks some scientific basis. This one too has not been really proven thoroughly with research because it's based on case studies, not necessarily experiments. It definitely gets into some unconscious feelings as we talk about ideal self and self-esteem, things like that. And that if we focus too much on ourselves, like individualistically, it can lead to self-indulgence, selfishness, and even corruption. and that this theory is almost too focused on the good and doesn't recognize the human capacity for evil. So it doesn't really explain when people are really genuinely bad and mistreat one another and do bad things to one another, which is a horrible final thought for this very warm and fuzzy theory. I like this theory a lot, if for no other reason than it's very encouraging. Do I know which one is the most accurate? I'll tell you after you learn all four. And that's the next lecture. All right, bye.